Welcome to the Panic Room, where we talk about all things panic-inducing. I am the Queen of Panic. Warning, some episodes may contain content that may be disturbing to others. Viewer discretion is advised. Now let the games begin.
I am not a good person. I never have been. Since childhood, I've been drawn to the shadows, where laws felt more like guidelines. My early years were laced with petty thefts, the thrill of taking what wasn't mine. It was a game, a way to pass the long, empty hours in our sleepy town. But now, on Christmas Day, I was planning something bigger. I had my eye on a house at the edge of town, one that seemed forgotten by its owners and the world. It sat there, draped in shadows, its secrets calling out to me. I spent weeks watching the house, learning its rhythms. The owners, a reclusive couple, barely left. But on Christmas, they would visit family out of town, leaving the house vulnerable, alone. I mapped out every detail, the way I'd enter, the rooms I'd search, the treasures I might find. My tools were simple, a testament to the years of honing this craft. A lockpick set, a flashlight, gloves, and my unwavering nerve. In my mind, the plan unfolded like a well-read book, each chapter leading inexorably to the next. As Christmas lights twinkled in the distance, casting eerie shadows on the snow, I felt a sense of destiny. This was not just another theft. It was the accumulation of all my years lurking in the dark, a testament to the life I had chosen. And so, as the town settled into festive peace of Christmas night, I prepared to step into the cold, dark world that had always been my true home. As the festive lights of Christmas blinked obliviously across the town, I approached the house, my heart beating a rhythm of anticipation. The night was silent except for the crunch of snow under my boots. I reached the back door, where shadows clung like protective cloaks. My tools, extensions of my own seasoned hands, worked deftly, and within moments, I was inside. The house whispered with the echoes of absent lives. I moved through the darkened rooms, my flashlight a small orb of light in the consuming darkness. The beam flickered across old photographs, ornate furniture, and shelves lined with knickknacks, each item a fragment of the lives I was intruding upon. In the living room, amidst the muted glint of Christmas decorations, I found a cabinet that seemed promising. I was sifting through papers and trinkets, searching for anything of value, when a sudden noise shattered the silence. Car doors, voices, the unmistakable sounds of people returning home. Panic surged through me, a cold tide. I snapped off my flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. My heart pounded in my ears, a frantic drumbeat. Through the window, I saw the flickering of headlights as the car pulled into the driveway. Then, a moment that stretched into eternity. The front door opened. Lights spilled into the hallway, and I heard footsteps. The homeowners were back, much earlier than I had anticipated. I held my breath, frozen in the darkness. A flicker of light danced through the gap underneath the living room door. They must have seen the brief flash of my flashlight, a ghostly glimmer in their otherwise undisturbed home. It was a moment of reckoning, a sliver of time where every choice led to this inevitable confrontation. I pressed myself into the shadows, my mind racing with escape plans. But for now, I was trapped, a predator turned prey in the game I had so recklessly begun. The sound of a gun being loaded was unmistakable, a clear mechanical click that cut through the stillness of the house. My blood ran cold. The man was arming himself, a primal response to the perceived invasion of his sanctuary. I could hear him moving throughout the house, his footsteps heavy with intent. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of movement, was a signal of the impending danger I had brought upon myself. My mind raced. every sense heightened in the desperate need for survival. I crouched in the darkness, moving with a stealth I didn't know I possessed. The house, once a treasure trove, now felt like a labyrinth designed to trap me. I navigated through the shadows, avoiding the beams of light that sliced through the darkness as the man searched room after room. Finally, I reached the front door. To my disbelief, it was unlocked. Perhaps in their rush to confront the intruder, they had forgotten to secure it. I eased it open. A sliver of cold night air greeted me like a whisper of freedom. I stepped outside, the snow underfoot feeling like the softest carpet in contrast to the hard, unyielding floors of the house. I was a breath away from escape, my heart pounding with the promise of safety. But then, a scream shattered the night, the woman's voice, high-pitched and terror-stricken. It was followed by a sound that echoed in my very bones. A gunshot. It rang out, a brutal punctuation to the night's events. I froze, the urge to run warring with the shock of what I had just heard. The world seemed to hold its breath, the aftermath of the shot hanging in the air like a malevolent spirit. I didn't know what had happened inside, who the bullet had found. The unknown outcome of the single, violent act was a shadow that loomed over me, even as I stood on the cusp of escape. As I turned to flee into the night, my steps felt strangely heavy, as if the weight of my deeds was physically dragging me down. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape was waning, replaced by a deep, unexplainable exhaustion. I stumbled forward, each step more laborious than the last. Then, without warning, my legs gave way beneath me and I collapsed, my face plunging into the cold embrace of the snow. A sharp, burning pain erupted in my side, a pain that I hadn't noticed in the chaos of escape. It was then, in that jarring moment of stillness, that the realization hit me. The gunshot had found its mark. I had been hit. Lying there, face pressed against the icy snow, the world began to fade in and out of focus. A wave of sensations overwhelmed me. The biting cold against my skin, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, the sharp sting of the wound. My breaths came in shallow gasps, each one a Herculean effort. As the life ebbed slowly from my body, my mind raced with a tumult of thoughts and regrets. Images of my past, the choices I had made, the path that had led me here, flickered through my consciousness like a disjointed movie. I thought of the people in the house, their lives forever altered by my actions, and a profound sadness washed over me. There was a deep, aching cold that seeped into my bones, a cold that went beyond the physical. It was the cold of unfulfilled dreams, of potential never realized, of a life spent lurking in the shadows. I felt a profound loneliness, a realization that I was exiting this world that I had lived in, alone, misunderstood, a ghost in the lives of others. In these final moments, time seemed to stretch and warp. The distant sounds of the night, the gentle whisper of the wind, the muffled voices from the house, all seemed to converge into a single, harmonious note, a farewell lullaby to a life spent in darkness. And then, as the snow gently continued to fall, covering me in a shroud of white, I let go, surrendering into the inevitable embrace of death, the final chapter of a story written in shadows. As I lay there, succumbing to the cold embrace of the end, a faint but persistent sound began to permeate the fog of my consciousness. It was rhythmic and unyielding, piercing the veil of my fading awareness. At first, I thought it was the beep of a hospital machinery, a sign that I had been saved and was clinging to life in some sterile white room. But as the sound continued, insistent and unchanging, a new realization dawned on me. It wasn't the sterile beep of medical equipment. It was something far more mundane and familiar. It was my alarm clock, its relentless ringing designed to wake me from a nap in my car before the night's planned activities. With this realization, the cold snow, the burning pain, and the heavy silence of the night began to dissolve around me. I opened my eyes, not to the starless sky or the falling snow, but to the cramped interior of my car, parked in a shadowy corner of the deserted street. The alarm continued its shrill call, pulling me further from the grips of the dream. I sat up, disoriented, my heart still racing from the vividness of the dream. The images of breaking into the house, the gunshot, the desperate escape, it all felt so real, so tangible, yet here I was, safe in my car, unharmed. The adrenaline that had fueled my imagined flight was still coursing through me, leaving me a lingering sense of unease. I turned off the alarm, the sudden silence feeling heavy and profound. The dream had been a journey through my deepest fears and regrets, a stark mirror reflecting the darker facets of my life and choices. I sat there for a moment, trying to collect myself, the remnants of the dream still clinging to me like shadows. As I slowly prepared to carry out the night's plan, the dream weighed heavily on my mind. It was a haunting reminder, a spectral warning of what could be, a path I was walking that might lead to darkness deeper than any I had known. I couldn't shake the feeling that the dream was more than just a figment of my imagination. It was a crossroads, a moment of choice between the life I knew and a chance to change my course. With the vivid memory of the dream still lingering, I proceeded with the plan, a sense of déjà vu washing over me as each step mirrored the haunting sequence of my nightmare. As before, I approached the house under the cloak of night, the town around me silent and still, wrapped in the festive tranquility of Christmas. The back door yielded my tools as it had in my dream, a silent invitation into the world that lay beyond. Inside, the house was a carbon copy of my imagined infiltration. The darkness enveloped me, broken only by the narrow beam of my flashlight. It felt like retracing steps in a well-worn path, each room a haunting echo of the dream. The photographs, the furniture, the Christmas decorations, all were exactly as I had seen them in my sleep-induced heist. I moved to the living room, where the same cabinet stood, its contents unchanged, waiting as if it knew of my return. I rifled through the items with a sense of urgency, spurred by the memory of what had followed this act in my dream. Then, cutting through the silence, the unmistakable sound of a car, the same sequence unfolding, the car doors, the voices, the return of the homeowners. My heart raced, not just with the fear of being caught, but with the eerie replication of the dream. I extinguished my flashlight, the darkness enveloping me like a protective shroud. The front door opened, light spilled into the hallway, and the sound of footsteps grew nearer. The familiarity of the situation was overwhelming, a surreal repetition of a nightmare. I remained motionless, the realization dawning on me that I was living through the exact sequence of events I had dreamt. The parallel was uncanny, unsettling, as if I had somehow stepped into a preordained script. In that moment, the lines between reality and the dream blurred, leaving me questioning the nature of my actions, the path I had chosen, and the eerie sense that somehow I had been given a glimpse into a future that now was unfolding before my very eyes. Contrary to the sequence of events in my dream, I didn't attempt to flee through the front door. Instead, I retraced my steps, heading towards the back door through which I had entered. The familiarity of the route offered no comfort, only a heightened sense of urgency as I navigated the darkened corridors of the house. Just as I reached the back door, the same exit through which I had planned to vanish into the night, fate intervened. The homeowner appeared, as if conjured from the very fabric of my nightmare. His face was a mask of fear and determination, a mirror of my own terror. In a moment, charged with panic and confusion, he raised his gun. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, a final, irrevocable act that shattered the night's stillness. The bullet hit me squarely in the face, A direct, lethal impact. The sensation was indescribable, a catastrophic explosion of pain and shock. Time seemed to fracture, each second splintering into a million shards of awareness. There was a sensation of flying backward, the world tilting into a chaotic, spinning blur. As I lay there, the ground beneath me as unforgiving as the bullet that had found its mark, a flood of sensations overwhelmed me. There was a profound disorientation, a feeling of being untethered from reality, drifting in a void where time and space lost all meaning. The pain was immense and all-consuming, yet strangely distant, as if I was both experiencing it and observing it from afar. My vision faded, the world dissolving into a haze of light and shadow. In those final moments, my thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and regret. Images and memories flickered through my mind, disjointed and fragmented, like pieces of a life hastily torn apart. There was a deep, unsettling realization of the finality of it all, the irrevocable closing of a chapter. The sounds of the world grew faint, distant echoes in a rapidly diminishing consciousness. I felt a profound sense of isolation, a solitary journey into an unknown that awaited just beyond the veil of life. And then, as darkness enveloped me, I surrendered to the inevitable, a lone figure disappearing into the eternal night. Again, I jolted awake in my car. The alarm clock's relentless ringing pierced the silence of the night. The terror that gripped me was different this time. It was deeper, more visceral. The repetition of the dream, so vivid and so violent, left me with an unshakable feeling that what was happening couldn't possibly be just a figment of my imagination. Driven by a mixture of fear and an inexplicable compulsion, I found myself once more approaching the house. The snow crunched underfoot, a familiar yet ominous soundtrack to my actions. This time, however, I didn't use my flashlight. The memory of its beam alerting the homeowners in my dreams was too vivid, too cautionary. I entered the house again. The darkness inside felt thicker, almost tangible. I navigated by memory, the layout of the house etched into my mind by the repeated dreams. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint beat of my heart and the quiet creak of the floorboards under my stealthy steps. In the living room, surrounded by the shadows and the soft glow of the Christmas decorations, I waited. The anticipation was suffocating, a blend of fear and an eerie sense of inevitability. My breaths were shallow, my senses heightened to every sound, every possible movement. Time seemed to stretch, each minute an hour in its own right. I was acutely aware of every detail, the slight rustle of the curtains, the distant ticking of a clock, the occasional gust of wind against the windows. The wait was an ordeal in itself, a test of nerves and resolve. Then, as expected, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway cut through the night. Car doors, voices, the unmistakable sound of people returning home. But this time, I was not a hidden intruder caught off guard. I was a silent observer, shrouded in darkness, waiting for the inevitable unfolding of events. As the front door opened and light spilled into the house, I remained motionless, a shadow amongst shadows. The feeling of dread was overwhelming, a premonition of something terrible yet undefined. This was no longer a simple act of theft. It had become something else, something much darker and more profound. As the homeowners entered, something within me snapped. Rational thought evaporated, replaced by a primal, uncontrollable urge. I lunged from the shadows, driven by an irrational need to inflict harm, to end the life of the man who, in my repeated nightmares, had become my tormentor. My actions were frenzied, devoid of any reasoning. I attacked him with a ferocity that was foreign to me, each movement fueled by the anguish and terror that had been festering within me. Through clenched teeth, I hurled accusations at him, blaming him for the suffering and terror he had inflicted upon me in those vivid dreams. The struggle was chaotic, a whirlwind of motion and noise. I was beyond hearing, beyond feeling anything but the overwhelming desire to end the cycle of fear and violence. But in the midst of my frenzied assault, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. The pain was immediate and all-consuming, a searing agony that erupted in my back. The force of the bullet knocked me forward, and I collapsed, my body no longer under my control. As I lay there, the reality of what I had done began to sink in. The room spun around me, a carousel of light and shadow. The pain in my back was a fierce, burning entity, consuming my thoughts and my senses. My breaths were ragged, each one a monumental effort. I could hear the homeowners, their voices a distant echo filled with shock and fear. In those final moments, the enormity of my mistake crystallized in my mind. I had allowed my dreams, my irrational fears, to dictate my actions, leading me down a path of violence and destruction. The realization was crushing, a burden too heavy to bear. As I lay dying, my thoughts were a tangle of regret and sorrow. I thought of the life I could have led, the choices I might have made differently. The cold floor beneath me was a stark reminder of the path I had chosen, a path that led me here, to this tragic end. The darkness crept in, encroaching on the edges of my vision. I felt myself slipping away, the world receding into a distant point of light. And then, with a final breath, I surrendered to the inevitable, my last thought a whisper of remorse for a life lost to shadows and fear. Once more, I awoke with a start in my car, the alarm clock ceasing its incessant ringing as I fumbled to turn it off. This time, panic engulfed me entirely, a tidal wave of terror that left no room for doubt or question. The repeated dreams, each ending in death, had taken their toll on my psyche, leaving me in a state of utter despair. Without a second thought, I started the car, the engine coming to life with a roar that seemed to mirror my frantic need to escape. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get as far away from that house, from those dreams, as possible. As I drove, a chaotic prayer spilled from my lips, a plea for forgiveness, for salvation from the nightmare that seemed to have ensnared me. I begged for a release, for some divine intervention to free me from the cycle of violence and death that had taken hold of my mind. But in my panic-stricken state, my focus was scattered, my thoughts a jumble of fear and supplication. I didn't see the truck, a massive, unstoppable force, until it was too late. It slammed into the side of my car with a deafening crash. The world exploded into a maelstrom of metal and glass. The impact was immense, a crushing blow that sent waves of excruciating pain through my body. I could feel myself being torn from the driver's seat, the world spinning wildly out of control. In those final moments, there was a surreal sense of detachment, as if I was watching the end of my own life from afar. The sounds of the crash echoed in my ears, a symphony of destruction that seemed to last an eternity. I was vaguely aware of voices, distant and muffled, and the sound of sirens approaching. But they were all external to the deep, enveloping darkness that was closing in on me. As I lay there dying, my thoughts were consumed by regret and a profound sense of sorrow. I thought of the lives I had impacted, the trail of chaos I had left in my wake. I realized then that my prayers for salvation were too late, that the path I had chosen had led me to this final, tragic moment. And then, as the darkness claimed me, I surrendered to the inevitable. My last thought was a silent plea for forgiveness in a world that I was leaving behind. In this relentless cycle, each awakening in the car was a prelude to a different, yet equally harrowing demise. The variety of my ends only added to the torment, a cruel kaleidoscope of deaths that seemed to mock my desperation to break from this nightmare loop. In one iteration, after fleeing the house, I found myself pursued by an unseen assailant. The chase was frantic, through the dark alleys and the deserted streets. Just when I thought I had evaded my pursuer, I felt a sharp pain, a stabbing that came from nowhere, and I collapsed to the cold pavement, the life ebbing from my body. Another time, I tried to friendly confront the homeowners on their porch, hoping to alter the night's events. But as I spoke with them, a sudden, inexplicable explosion tore through the house. I was caught in the blast, the world erupting into fire, and chaos around me. The last thing I remember was the searing heat and the suffocating smoke enveloping me. Once, I decided to stay in the car, refusing to engage with the house. But even there, death found me. I was overcome by a sudden illness, my body racked with pain and fever. I could feel my life slipping away as I lay in the back seat, unable to call for help, the world fading into darkness around me. In a particularly bizarre turn, I tried to leave town, but a freak accident occurred, a collision with a wild animal on the road. The impact sent the car careening off the road, rolling over multiple times. The world was a blur of motion and noise, ending with the crushing finality of impact. Each death was different, yet the result was always the same. I would wake up again in the car, the sense of impending doom more oppressive with each iteration. It seemed there was no escape, no matter what actions I took. The variety of my ends only served to highlight the inescapable nature of the cycle, a loop of terror and death from which there was no reprieve. Sitting in my car once again, the sound of the alarm clock piercing the silence of the early morning, a chilling realization dawned on me. The first death, the one that seemed like the beginning of this nightmarish loop, felt like the only real one. A horrifying thought crept into my mind. What if that was my true end, and this reoccurring cycle was my own personal hell? Surrounded by the familiar confines of my car, I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation and despair. It was as if I was trapped in a realm detached from reality, a purgatory of my own making. The repetition of my deaths, each different yet equally final, seemed like a cruel punishment for my past actions. If you have any stories that you would like to see narrated here on the channel, please go into the subreddit and submit them there. The link is in the description. Also, we do have a Discord now. Thank you so much to Creepy Clown Girl for putting it together for us. You can come hang out with me and other narrators and get the party started, get spooky with us. That link is also in the description as well. And last but certainly not least, I wanted to introduce the King of Panic. We have a lot of brand new content coming soon with him in it. He is very talented. He does not have his own channel. He just kind of wants to be a part of this. So if you would like to hear from him once you start and you like his voice, stay tuned here. And as always, thank you for visiting the Panic Room. You have successfully made it to the next portion of your tour. Please stay tuned for your next prompt. Click the like button and subscribe to receive notifications for when the next portion of your tour is ready to join. Thank you for watching. Don't let the panic drown you.